The Chateau de Brissac is the tallest chateau in all of France. It's cultured, historied, and absolutely beautiful. It has high ornate ceilings and 7 stories with 200 rooms, all of which are filled with luxurious furniture and gorgeous French art, but also, like many ancient buildings, has its own resident ghost, La Dame in Vert. She roams the halls of the tower room in the chapel, scaring visitors away. This is her story. In the 15th century, King Charles VII had a daughter with his mistress, Agnes Sorel. She was in a strange position, being the half-sister to the soon-to-be King Louis XI, but she soon became useful to her father. It was 1462, and Charlotte, King Charles VII's illegitimate daughter, was being given in marriage to a man named Chateau de Brissac. Jacques' father was named Pierre Brissac. He was a powerful minister to the king and later to King Louis XI. He was the one who rebuilt the castle into a fortress for future wars. When the War of Two Roses broke out, Pierre died protecting Louis at the Battle of Montlhéry in the year 1965 and left Le Chateau de Brissac to his son Jacques. So Jacques and his wife Charlotte were sent off to live at Le Chateau Brissac, and they continued to live there for the duration of the union. It was, and still is, one of the most beautiful and desired locations in all of France. And they had plenty of servants to wait on them hand and foot, but even with all their luxuries, their lives wouldn't be as easy as it appeared at first glance. The marriage was politically advantageous at the time, but in many ways, they weren't a good match for one another. She was scholarly and preferred to stay inside. Jacques, on the other hand, was an outdoorsy hunter who was never around. They started off distant and remained that way throughout their entire relationship. They didn't even sleep in the same room together. Not that he would have been around all that often to be in bed with her. It was no surprise then that she started having a passionate affair with a huntsman named Pierre de Laverne. He was there for her when her husband wasn't, and she never really had a choice in marrying Jacques in the first place. Of course, this secret couldn't be kept forever. And on May 31st, Jacques came home from another one of his many long hunting trips. He ate dinner with his wife and went to his room to go to bed. Unfortunately for her, one of Jacques' servants spotted her sneaking off to the room underneath the chapel where Pierre was staying. Being loyal to Jacques first and foremost, they decided to tell Jacques about the affair. He came down to see for himself and talked to her about the allegations, which he was certain were all a misunderstanding, when he caught them in the act. Then, in a blind fury, he killed her and her lover in cold blood. In the haze of violence, he ended up destroying both her eyes and her nose. That, however, is not where her story ends. Moaning, constant moaning. Day and night, she and Laverne haunted him from beyond the grave. Restless and relentless, they tormented him, seeking revenge for their brutal murder. Eventually, Jacques couldn't take it anymore and he moved away. Laverne was only staying to help her get revenge on Jacques, so he eventually decided to pass over into the afterlife. That great beyond, past the veil, was calling him, and he simply needed to know what was on the other side. She, however, remained. Perhaps in part because she loved the chateau. It was her home, where she already wanted to spend all of her time when she was alive in the first place. It was cultured and historied, and from her perspective, its history had just begun. 'Twas built by the Counts of Anjou a century before her time. Apparently, King Philip II, the first proper king of France, gave the property to Guillaume de Roche. Guillaume was a French knight and crusader. He was also the seneschal of Anjou, Maine, and Touraine. Essentially, he managed the households of his lord's day-to-day business while his lord was away. He served the Angevin kings of England, a royal house originating in France that ruled parts of England in the 12th and early 13th centuries. Henry II, Richard I, and John, yes, just John, were the monarchs he served. In 1202, however, he switched his loyalty to King Philip II of France. While her father had ordered his ministers to rebuild it into a fort-like structure, it had always been more than that to her. To her, it was home. After her death, and after she got her husband to leave, she had nothing but time. She could finally sit back and watch the world go by from the relative comfort of one of the most luxurious homes in all of history. When the French wars of religion broke out, Henry of Navarre decided he owned her castle. The war left the fortress heavily damaged, and she overheard people outside scheduling a date to demolish it. She couldn't really do much to stop it, so she started doing her best to enjoy what time she had left with her home and to get her ghostly affairs in order. But then a chap called Charles II de Casse sided with Henry of Navarre, and together they got Henry crowned King Henry IV. He decided to give the Chateau de Brissac to a man named Charles de Cross, along with a fancy new title, making him Charles II, Duke of Brissac, as well as the funds to finally get her home fixed up. It had been too long since her home had been in one piece, and she didn't mind the family that moved in. This reconstruction officially turned the fortress into a chateau. Not just any chateau, though. The tallest chateau in all of France. Charlotte always knew her home was special. Now its facade was so very baroque and modern. Later on, August Louis VIII and his mother decided to meet in the neutral territory of the Chateau Brissac. The most interesting thing that had happened in a while. You could cut the tension of the soap opera-like negotiations with a knife, but they ultimately decided on a temporary truce. Later on, Charlotte would overhear that Louis had his mother banished, so the truce was temporary indeed. Things calmed down until 1792, when the French Revolution spilled out into her chateau. It was ransacked, pillaged, and damaged right before her very eyes. Then it was left abandoned, crying out in pain for half a century. Sacre bleu. Finally, in 1844, the Duke's descendants got around to restoring her home to its proper glory. They still keep her company as best as they can to this day. She doesn't mind them, as they fixed up her home and all. Furthermore, they've all gotten used to having her around, so it's really no problem either way. She's seen their family grow up generation after generation for about a century and a half now. She still gets up early in the morning and roams the old halls. She spends a lot of time in the chapel at the top of the tower wearing her favorite green dress, as well as just below the chapel still ruminating over what happened to her all those centuries ago. She's mostly left to herself, but sometimes random strangers will show up and bother her, so she gives them a good scare to get them to leave her alone. But otherwise, she minds her own business. As far as she's concerned, she isn't going anywhere anytime soon. If you like this story, we have plenty more just like it on the channel, so I would highly recommend you like the video and subscribe, as we have many more videos just like this on the way. Always remember just how strange life can be.